The Adventure of the Three Students by Arthur Conan Doyle. It was in the year 95 that a combination of events, into which I need not enter, caused Mr. Sherlock Holmes and myself to spend some weeks in one of our great university towns. And it was during this time that a small but instructive adventure which I am about to relate befell us. It will be obvious that any details which would help the reader to exactly identify the college or the criminal may well be allowed to die out. With due discretion, the incident itself may, however, be described, since it serves to illustrate some of those qualities for which my friend was remarkable. I will endeavour in my statement to avoid such terms as would serve to limit the events to any particular place, or give a clue as to the people concerned. We were residing at the time in furnished lodgings close to a library, where Sherlock Holmes was pursuing some laborious researches in early English charters, researches which led to results so striking that they may be the subject of one of my future narratives. Here it was that one evening we received a visit from an acquaintance, Mr. Hilton Soames, tutor and lecturer at the College of St. Luke's. Mr. Soames was a tall, spare man of a nervous and excitable temperament. I had always known him to be restless in his manner, but on this particular occasion he was in such a state of uncontrollable agitation that it was clear something very unusual had occurred. "I trust, Mr. Holmes, that you can spare me a few hours of your valuable time. We have had a very painful incident at St. Luke's, and really, but for the happy chance of your being in the town, I should have been at a loss what to do." "I am very busy just now, and desire no distractions," my friend answered. "I should much prefer that you called in the aid of the police." "No, no, my dear sir, such a course is utterly impossible. When once the law is evoked, it cannot be stayed again. And this is just one of those cases where, for the credit of the college, it is most essential to avoid scandal. Your discretion is as well known as your powers, and you are the one man in the world who can help me. I beg you, Mr. Holmes, to do what you can." My friend's temper had not improved since he had been deprived of the congenial surroundings of Baker Street. Without his scrapbooks, his chemicals, and his homely untidiness, he was a very uncomfortable man. He shrugged his shoulders in ungracious acquiescence, while our visitor, in hurried words and with much excitable gesticulation, poured forth his story. "I must explain to you, Mr. Holmes, that tomorrow is the first day of the examination for the Fortescue Scholarship. I am one of the examiners. My subject is Greek, and the first of the papers consists of a large passage of Greek translation, which the candidate has not seen. This passage is printed on the examination paper, and it would naturally be an immense advantage if the candidate could prepare it in advance. For this reason, great care is taken to keep the paper secret. Today, about 3 o'clock, the proofs of this paper arrived from the printers. The exercise consists of half a chapter of Thucydides. I had to read it over carefully, as the text must be absolutely correct. At 4:30, my task was not yet completed. I had, however, promised to take tea in a friend's rooms, so I left the proof upon my desk. I was absent rather more than an hour. You are aware, Mr. Holmes, that our college doors are double, a green baize one within and a heavy oak one without. As I approached my outer door, I was amazed to see a key in it. For an instant I imagined that I had left my own there, but on feeling in my pocket I found that it was all right. The only duplicate which existed, so far as I knew, was that which belonged to my servant, Bannister, a man who has looked after my room for 10 years, and whose honesty is absolutely above suspicion. I found that the key was indeed his, that he had entered my room to know if I wanted tea, and that he had very carelessly left the key in the door when he came out. His visit to my room must have been within a very few minutes of my leaving it. His forgetfulness about the key would have mattered little upon any other occasion, but on this one day it has produced the most deplorable consequences. The moment I looked at my table, I was aware that someone had rummaged among my papers. The proof was in 3 long slips. I had left them all together. Now I found that one of them was lying on the floor, one was on the side table near the window, and the third was where I had left it. Holmes stirred for the first time. The first page on the floor, the second in the window, and the third where you left it, said he. Exactly, Mr. Holmes. You amaze me. How could you possibly know that? Pray continue your very interesting statement. For an instant I imagined that Bannister had taken the unpardonable liberty of examining my papers. He denied it, however, with the utmost earnestness, and I am convinced that he was speaking the truth. The alternative was that someone passing had observed the key in the door, had known that I was out, and had entered to look at the papers. A large sum of money is at stake, for the scholarship is a very valuable one, and an unscrupulous man might very well run a risk in order to gain advantage over his fellows. Bannister was very much upset by the incident. He had nearly fainted when we found that the papers had undoubtedly been tampered with. I gave him a little brandy and left him collapsed in a chair while I made a most careful examination of the room. I soon saw that the intruder had left other traces of his presence besides the rumpled papers. On the table in the window were several shreds from a pencil which had been sharpened. A broken tip of lead was lying there also. Evidently the rascal had copied the paper in a great hurry, had broken his pencil, and had been compelled to put a fresh point to it. Excellent, said Holmes, who was recovering his good humour as his attention became more engrossed by the case. Fortune has been your friend. This was not all. I have a new writing table with a fine surface of red leather. I am prepared to swear, and so is Bannister, that it was smooth and unstained. Now I found a clean cut in it, about 3 inches long, not a mere scratch, but a positive cut. Not only this, but on the table I found a small ball of black dough or clay, with specks of something which looks like sawdust in it. I am convinced that these marks were left by the man who rifled the papers. There were no footmarks and no other evidence as to his identity. I was at my wit's end, when suddenly the happy thought occurred to me that you were in the town, and I came straight round to put the matter into your hands. Do help me, Mr. Holmes. You see my dilemma. Either I must find the man, or else the examination must be postponed until fresh papers are prepared, and since this cannot be done without explanation, there will ensue a hideous scandal, which will throw a cloud not only on the college but on the university. Above all things, I desire to settle the matter quietly and discreetly. I shall be happy to look into it and give you such advice as I can, said Holmes, rising and putting on his overcoat. This case is not entirely devoid of interest. Had anyone visited you in your room after the papers came to you? Yes, young Dowlat Ras, an Indian student who lives on the same stair, came in to ask me some particulars about the examination. For which he was entered? Yes, and the papers were on your table. To the best of my belief, they were rolled up, but might be recognized as proofs. Possibly. No one else in your room? No. Did anyone know that these proofs would be there? No one, save the printer. Did this man Bannister know? No, certainly not. No one knew. Where is Bannister now? He was very ill, poor fellow. I left him collapsed in the chair. I was in such a hurry to come to you. You left your door open. I locked the papers up first. Then it amounts to this, Mr. Soames, that unless the Indian student recognized the roll as being proofs, the man who tampered with them came upon them accidentally, without knowing that they were there. So it seems to me. Holmes gave an enigmatic smile. Well, said he, let us go round. Not one of your cases, Watson. Mental, not physical. All right, come if you want to. Now, Mr. Soames, at your disposal. The sitting room of our client opened by a long, low, latticed window onto the ancient, lichen-tinted court of the old college. A Gothic arched window led to a worn stone staircase. On the ground floor was the tutor's room. Above were 3 students, one on each story. It was already twilight when we reached the scene of our problem. Holmes halted and looked earnestly at the window. Then he approached it, and standing on tiptoe with his neck craned, he looked into the room. He must have entered through the door. There is no opening except the one pane, said our learned guide. Dear me, said Holmes, and he smiled in a singular way as he glanced at our companion. Well, if there is nothing to be learned here, we had best go inside. The lecturer unlocked the outer door and ushered us into his room. We stood at the entrance, while Holmes made an examination of the carpet. I'm afraid there are no signs here, said he. One could hardly hope for any upon so dry a day. Your servant seems to have quite recovered. You left him in a chair, you say. Which chair? By the window, there. I see. Near this little table. You can come in now. I have finished with the carpet. Let us take the little table first. Of course, what has happened is very clear. The man entered and took the papers, sheet by sheet, from the central table. He carried them over to the window table, because from there he could see if you came across the courtyard and so could effect an escape. As a matter of fact, he could not, said Soames, for I entered by the side door. Ah, that's good. Well, anyhow, that was in my mind. Let me see the 3 strips. No finger impressions. No. Well, he carried over this one first, and he copied it. How long would it take him to do that, using every possible contraction? 1/4 of an hour, not less. Then he tossed it down and seized the next. He was in the midst of that when your return caused him to make a very hurried retreat. Very hurried, since he had not time to replace the papers which would tell you that he had been there. You were not aware of any hurrying feet on the stair as you entered the outer door. No, I can't say I was. Well, he wrote so furiously that he broke his pencil and had, as you observe, to sharpen it again. This is of interest, Watson. The pencil was not an ordinary one. It was about the usual size, with a soft lead. The outer colour was dark blue. The maker's name was printed in silver lettering, and the piece remaining is only about 1.5 inches long. Look for such a pencil, Mr. Soames, and you have got your man. When I add that he possesses a large and very blunt knife, you have an additional aid. Mr. Soames was somewhat overwhelmed by this flood of information. I can follow the other points, said he, but really in this matter of the length. Holmes held out a small chip with the letters NN and a space of clear wood after them. You see. No, I fear that even now. Watson, I have always done you an injustice. There are others. What could this NN be? It is at the end of a word. You are aware that Johann Faber is the most common maker's name. Is it not clear that there is just as much of the pencil left as usually follows Johann? He held the small table sideways to the electric light. I was hoping that if the paper on which you wrote was thin, some trace of it might come through upon this polished surface. No, I see nothing. I don't think there is anything more to be learned here. Now, for the central table. This small pellet is, I presume, the black doughy mass you spoke of. Roughly pyramidal in shape and hollowed out, I perceive. As you say, there appear to be grains of sawdust in it. Dear me, this is very interesting. And the cut, a positive tear, I see. It began with a thin scratch and ended in a jagged hole. I am much indebted to you for directing my attention to this case, Mr. Soames. Where does that door lead to? To my bedroom. Have you been in it since your adventure? No, I came straight away for you. I should like to have a glance around. What a charming old-fashioned room. Perhaps you will kindly wait a minute until I have examined the floor. No, I see nothing. What about this curtain? You hang your clothes behind it. If anyone were forced to conceal themselves in this room, he must do it there, since the bed is too low and the wardrobe is too shallow. No one there, I suppose? As Holmes drew the curtain, I was aware, from some little rigidity and alertness of his attitude, that he was prepared for an emergency. As a matter of fact, the drawn curtain disclosed nothing but 3 or 4 suits of clothes hanging from a line of pegs. Holmes turned away and stooped suddenly to the floor. "Hello! What's this?" said he. It was a small pyramid of black, putty-like stuff, exactly like the one upon the table of the study. Holmes held it out on his open palm in the glare of the electric light. "Your visitor seems to have left traces in your bedroom as well as in your sitting room, Mr. Soames. What could he have wanted there? I think it is clear enough. You came back by an unexpected way, and so he had no warning until you were at the very door. What could he do? He caught up everything which would betray him and rushed into your bedroom to conceal himself. Good gracious, Mr. Holmes! Do you mean to tell me that all the time I was talking to Bannister in this room, we had the man prisoner? If we had only known it." "So I read it." "Surely there is another alternative, Mr. Holmes. I don't know whether you observed my bedroom window. Lattice-paned lead framework, 3 separate windows, one swinging on hinges, and large enough to admit a man." "Exactly. And it looks out on an angle of the courtyard so as to be partly invisible. The man might have effected his entrance there, left traces as he passed through the bedroom, and finally, finding the door open, have escaped that way." Holmes shook his head impatiently. "Let us be practical," said he. "I understand you to say that there are 3 students who use this stair and are in the habit of passing your door." "Yes, there are." "And they are all in for this examination." "Yes." "Have you any reason to suspect any one of them more than the others?" Soames hesitated. "It's a very delicate question," said he. "One hardly likes to throw suspicion where there are no proofs. Let us hear the suspicions. I will look after the proofs." "I'll tell you then, in a few words, the character of the 3 men who inhabit these rooms. The lower of the 3 is Gilchrist, a fine scholar and athlete, plays in the rugby team, the cricket team for the college, and got his blue for the hurdles and the long jump. He is a fine, manly fellow. His father was the notorious Sir Jabez Gilchrist, who ruined himself upon the turf. My scholar has been left very poor, but is hard-working and industrious. He'll do well. The second floor is inhabited by Dowlas Ras, the Indian. He is a quiet, inscrutable fellow, as most of these Indians are. He is well up in his work, though his Greek is his weak subject. He is steady and methodical. The top floor belongs to Miles Maclaren. He is a brilliant fellow when he chooses to work, one of the brightest intellects of the university, but he is wayward, dissipated, and unprincipled. He was nearly expelled over a card scandal in his first year. He has been idling all this term, and he must look forward with dread to the examination. Then it is he whom you suspect. I dare not go so far as that, but of the three, he is perhaps the least unlikely. Exactly. Now, Mr. Soames, let us have a look at your servant Bannister. He was a white-faced, clean-shaven, grizzly-haired fellow of 50. He was still suffering from this sudden disturbance of the quiet routine of his life. His plump face was twitching with his nervousness, and his fingers could not keep still. "We are investigating this unhappy business, Bannister," said his master. "Yes, sir." "I understand," said Holmes, "that you left your key in the door." "Yes, sir." Was it not very extraordinary that you should do this on the very day when there were these papers inside?" "It was most unfortunate, sir, but I have occasionally done the same thing at other times." "When did you enter the room?" "It was about 4:30. That is Mr. Soames' tea time." "How long did you stay?" "When I saw that he was absent, I withdrew at once." "Did you look at the papers on the table?" "No, sir, certainly not." "How came you to leave the key in the door?" "I had the tea tray in my hand. I thought I would come back for the key. Then I forgot." "Has the outer door a spring lock?" No, sir." "Then it was open all the time?" "Yes, sir." "Anyone in the room could get out?" "Yes, sir." "When Mr. Soames returned and called for you, you were very much disturbed?" "Yes, sir. Such a thing has never happened during the many years that I've been here. I nearly fainted, sir." "So I understand. Where were you when you began to feel bad?" "Where was I, sir? Why, here, near the door." "That is singular, because you sat down in that chair over yonder, near the corner. Why did you pass these other chairs?" "I really don't know, sir. It didn't much matter to me where I sat." I really don't think he knew much about it, Mr. Holmes. He was looking very bad, quite ghastly." "You stayed here when your master left?" "Only for a minute or so. Then I locked the door and went to my room." "Whom do you suspect?" "Oh, I would not venture to say, sir. I don't believe there is any gentleman in this university who's capable of profiting by such an action. No, sir, I'll not believe it." "Thank you, that will do," said Holmes. "Oh, one more word. You have not mentioned to any of the three gentlemen whom you attend that anything is amiss?" "No, sir, not a word." "You haven't seen any of them?" "No, sir." "Very good. Now, Mr. Soames, we will take a walk in the quadrangle, if you please." 3 yellow squares of light shone above us in the gathering gloom. "Your 3 birds are all in their nests," said Holmes, looking up. "Hello! What's that? One of them seems restless enough." It was the Indian, whose dark silhouette appeared suddenly upon the blind. He was pacing swiftly up and down his room. "I should like to have a peep at each of them," said Holmes. "Is it possible?" "No difficulty in the world," Soames answered. "This set of rooms is quite the oldest in the college, and is not unusual for visitors to go over them. Come along, and I'll personally conduct you." "No names, please," said Holmes, as we knocked at Gilchrist's door. A tall, flaxen-haired, slim young fellow opened it, and made us welcome when he understood our errand. There were some really curious pieces of medieval domestic architecture within. Holmes was so charmed with one of them that he insisted on drawing it on his notebook, broke his pencil, had to borrow one from our host, and finally borrowed a knife to sharpen his own. The same curious accident happened to him in the rooms of the Indian, a silent little hook-nosed fellow who asked us askance and was obviously glad when Holmes's architectural studies had come to an end. I could not see that in either case Holmes had come upon the clue for which he was searching. Only at the third did our visit prove abortive. The outer door would not open to our lock, and nothing more substantial than a torrent of bad language came from behind it. "I don't care who you are, you can go to blazes," roared the angry voice. "Tomorrow's the exam, and I won't be drawn by anyone." "A rude fellow," said our guide, flushing with anger as we withdrew down the stair. Of course, he didn't realize that it was I who was knocking, but nonetheless his conduct was very uncourteous, and indeed, under the circumstances, rather suspicious. Holmes's response was a curious one. "Can you tell me his exact height?" he asked. "Really, Mr. Holmes, I cannot undertake to say. He is taller than the Indian, not so tall as Gilchrist. I suppose 5'6" would be about it." "That is very important," said Holmes. "And now, Mr. Soames, I wish you good night." Our guide cried aloud in his astonishment and dismay. "Good gracious, Mr. Holmes, you're surely not going to leave me in this abrupt fashion? You don't seem to realize the position. Tomorrow is the examination. I must take some definite action tonight. I cannot allow the examination to be held if one of the papers has been tampered with. The situation must be faced." "You must leave it as it is. I shall drop round early tomorrow morning and chat the matter over. It is possible that I may be in a position then to indicate some course of action. Meanwhile, you change nothing. Nothing at all." "Very good, Mr. Holmes. You can be perfectly easy in your mind. We shall certainly find some way out of your difficulties. I will take the black clay with me, also the pencil cutting. Goodbye." When we were out in the darkness of the quadrangle, we again looked up at the windows. The Indian still paced his room. The others were invisible. "Well, Watson, what do you think of it?" Holmes asked as we came out into the main street. "Quite a little parlour game, a sort of 3-card trick, is it not? There are your 3 men. It must be one of them. You take your choice. Which is yours?" "The foul-mouthed fellow at the top. He's the one with the worst record, and yet that Indian was a sly fellow also. Why should he be pacing his room all the time? There's nothing in that. Many men do it when they're trying to learn anything by heart." He looked at us in a queer way. "So would you if a flock of strangers came in on you when you were preparing for an examination next day and every moment was of value. No, I see nothing in that. Pencils too, and knives. All was satisfactory. But that fellow does puzzle me." "Who?" "Why, Bannister, the servant. What's his game in the matter? He impressed me as being a perfectly honest man." "So he did me. That's the puzzling part. Why should a perfectly honest man— Well, here's a large stationer's. We shall begin our researches here." There were only 4 stationers of any consequence in the town, and at each Holmes produced his pencil chips and bid high for a duplicate. All were agreed that one could be ordered, but that it was not a usual size of pencil, and that it was seldom kept in stock. My friend did not appear to be depressed by his failure, but shrugged his shoulders in a half-humorous resignation. "No good, my dear Watson. This, the best and only final clue, has run to nothing. But indeed, I have little doubt that we can build up a sufficient case without it. By Jove, my dear fellow, it is nearly 9, and the landlady babbled of green peas at 7:30. What with your eternal tobacco, Watson, and your irregularity at meals, I expect that you will get notice to quit, and that I shall share your downfall. Not, however, before we have solved the problem of the nervous tutor, the careless servant, and the 3 enterprising students. Holmes made no further allusion to the matter that day, though he sat lost in thought for a long time after our belated dinner. At 8 in the morning he came into my room just as I finished my toilet. "Well, Watson," said he, "it is time we went down to St. Luke's. Can you do without breakfast?" "Certainly." "Soames will be in a dreadful fidget until we're able to tell him something positive." "Have you anything positive to tell him?" I think so." "You've formed a conclusion?" "Yes, my dear Watson, I have solved the mystery." "But what fresh evidence could you have got?" "Aha, it is not for nothing that I have turned myself out of bed at the untimely hour of 6. I have put in 2 hours' hard work and covered at least 5 miles, with something to show for it. Look at that." He held out his hand. On the palm were 3 little pyramids of black, doughy clay. "Why, Holmes, you only had 2 yesterday, and 1 more this morning. It's a fair argument that whatever number 3 came from is also the source of numbers 1 and 2. Eh, Watson? Well, come along and put friend Soames out of his pain." The unfortunate tutor was certainly in a state of pitiable agitation when we found him in his chambers. In a few hours the examinations would commence, and he was still in the dilemma between making the facts public and allowing the culprit to compete for the valuable scholarship. He could hardly stand still, so great was his mental agitation, and he ran towards Holmes with 2 eager hands outstretched. "Thank heaven that you have come. I feared that you had given up in despair. What am I to do? Shall the examination proceed?" "Yes, let it proceed, by all means." "But this rascal—" "He shall not compete." "You know him?" "I think so." "If this matter is not to become public, we must give ourselves certain powers, and resolve ourselves into a small private court-martial. You there, if you please, Soames. Watson, you here. I'll take the armchair in the middle. I think that we are now sufficiently imposing to strike terror into a guilty breast. Kindly ring the bell." Bannister entered and shrank back in evident surprise and fear at our judicial appearance. "You will kindly close the door," said Holmes. "Now, Bannister, will you please tell us the truth about yesterday's incident?" The man turned white to the roots of his hair. "I've told you everything, sir." "Nothing to add?" "Nothing at all, sir." "Well, then, I must make some suggestions to you. When you sat down on that chair yesterday, did you do so in order to conceal some object which would have shown who had been in the room?" Bannister's face was ghastly. "No, sir, certainly not." "It is only a suggestion," said Holmes suavely. "I frankly admit that I am unable to prove it, but it seems probable enough. Since the moment that Mr. Soames's back was turned, you released the man who was hiding in that bedroom." Bannister licked his dry lips. "There was no man, sir." "Ah, that's a pity, Bannister. Up to now you may have spoken the truth, but now I know that you have lied." The man's face set in sullen defiance. "There was no man, sir." Come, Bannister." "No, sir, there was no one." "In that case you can give us no further information. Would you please remain in the room? Stand over there near the bedroom door. Now, Soames, I'm going to ask you to have the great kindness to go up to the room of young Gilchrist and to ask him to step down into yours. An instant later the tutor returned, bringing with him the student. He was a fine figure of a man, tall, lithe, and agile, with a springy step and a pleasant open face. His troubled blue eyes glanced at each of us, and finally rested with an expression of blank dismay upon Bannister in the farther corner. "Just close the door," said Holmes. "Now, Mr. Gilchrist, we are all quite alone here, and no one need ever know one word of what passes between us. We can be perfectly frank with each other. We want to know, Mr. Gilchrist, how you, an honourable man, ever came to commit such an action as that of yesterday." The unfortunate young man staggered back and cast a look full of horror and reproach at Bannister. No, Mr. Gilchrist, sir, I never said a word, never one word," cried the servant. "No, but you have now," said Holmes. "Now, sir, you must see that after Bannister's words your position is hopeless, and that your only chance lies in a frank confession." For a moment, Gilchrist, with upraised hand, tried to control his writhing features. The next, he had thrown himself on his knees beside the table, and burying his face in his hands, he burst into a storm of passionate sobbing. Come, said Holmes kindly, "it is human to err, and at least no one can accuse you of being a callous criminal. Perhaps it would be easier for you if I were to tell Mr. Soames what occurred, and you can check me where I am wrong. Shall I do so?" Well, don't trouble to answer. Listen, and see that I do you no injustice. From the moment, Mr. Soames, that you said to me that no one, not even Bannister, could have told that the papers were in your room, the case began to take a definite shape in my mind. The printer one could, of course, dismiss. He could examine the papers in his own office. The Indian I also thought nothing of. If the proofs were in a roll, he could not possibly have known what they were. On the other hand, it seemed an unthinkable coincidence that a man should dare to enter the room, and that by chance, on that very day, the papers were on the table. I dismissed that. The man who entered knew that the papers were there. How did he know? When I approached your room, I examined the window. You amused me by supposing that I was contemplating the possibility of someone having in broad daylight, under the eyes of all these opposite rooms, forced himself through it. Such an idea was absurd. I was measuring how tall a man would need to be in order to see as he passed what papers were on the central table. I am 6 feet high, and I could do it with an effort. No one less than that would have a chance. Already, you see, I had reason to think that if one of your 3 students was a man of unusual height, he was the most worth watching of the 3. I entered, and I took you into my confidence as to the suggestions of the side table. Of the centre table I could make nothing, until, in your description of Gilchrist, you mentioned that he was a long-distance jumper. Then the whole thing came to me in an instant, and I only needed certain corroborative proofs, which I speedily obtained. What happened was this. This young fellow had employed his afternoon at the athletic grounds where he had been practicing the jump. He returned carrying his jumping shoes, which are provided, as you were aware, with several spikes. As he passed your window, he saw, by means of his great height, these proofs upon your table, and conjectured what they were. No harm would have been done had it not been that as he passed your door, he perceived the key which had been left by the carelessness of your servant. A sudden impulse came over him to enter and see if they were indeed the proofs. It was not a dangerous exploit, for he could always pretend that he had simply looked in to ask a question. Well, when he saw that they were indeed the proofs, It was then that he yielded to temptation. He put his shoes on the table. What was it you put on that chair near the window? Gloves, said the young man. Holmes looked triumphantly at Bannister. He put his gloves on the chair and he took the proofs sheet by sheet to copy them. He thought the tutor must return by the main gate and that he would see him. As we know, he came back by the side gate. Suddenly he heard him at the very door. There was no possible escape. He forgot his gloves, but he caught up his shoes and darted into the bedroom. You observe that the scratch on that table is slight at one side, but deepens in the direction of the bedroom door. That, in itself, is enough to show us that the shoes had been drawn in that direction, and that the culprit had taken refuge there. The earth round the spike had been left on the table, and the second sample was loosened and fell in the bedroom. I may add that I walked out to the athletic grounds this morning, saw that tenacious black clay is used in the jumping pit, and carried away a specimen of it, together with some of the fine tan or sawdust which is strewn over it to prevent the athlete from slipping. Have I told the truth, Mr. Gilchrist? The student had drawn himself erect. Yes, sir, it's true, said he. Good heavens, have you nothing to add? Cried Soames. Yes, sir, I have, but the shock of this disgraceful exposure has bewildered me. I have a letter here, Mr. Soames, which I wrote to you early this morning in the middle of a restless night. It was before I knew that my sin had been found out. Here it is, sir. You will see that I have said I am determined not to go in for the examination. I have been offered a commission in the Rhodesian police, and I am going out to South Africa at once. I am indeed pleased to hear that you did not intend to profit by your unfair advantage, said Soames. But why did you change your purpose? Gilchrist pointed to Bannister. There is the man who sent me in the right path, said he. Come now, Bannister, said Holmes. It will be clear to you from what I have said that only you could have let this young man out, since you were left in the room and must have locked the door when you went out. As to his escaping by that window, it was incredible. Can you not clear up the last point in this mystery, and tell us the reason for your action? It was simple enough, sir, if you had only known, but with all your cleverness it was impossible that you could know. Time was, sir, when I was butler to old Sir Jabez Gilchrist, this young gentleman's father. When he was ruined, I came to the college as servant, but I never forgot my old employer because he was down in the world. I watched his son all I could for the sake of the old days. Well, sir, when I came into this room yesterday, when the alarm was given, the first thing I saw was Mr. Gilchrist's tan gloves lying in that chair. I knew those gloves well, and I understood their message. If Mr. Soames saw them, the game was up. I flopped down into that chair, and nothing would budge me until Mr. Soames, he went for you. Then out come my poor young master, whom I had dandled on my knee, and confessed it all to me. Wasn't it natural, sir, that I should save him? And wasn't it natural also that I should try to speak to him as his dead father would have done, and made him understand that he could not profit by such a deed? Could you blame me, sir? No, indeed, said Holmes heartily, springing to his feet. Well, Soames, I think we have cleared your little problem up, and our breakfast awaits us at home. Come, Watson. As to you, sir, I trust that a bright future awaits you in Rhodesia. For once you have fallen low, let us see in the future how high you can rise. So that was The Adventure of the Three Students by Arthur Conan Doyle. So this is the part of the podcast where I say something about the author and about the publication details of the story, and then I look into my thoughts about the story, and I usually do a bit of research into the story before to kind of bring out interesting themes. So let's go. Clearly, this isn't the first Arthur Conan Doyle or the first Sherlock Holmes story I've done. I think I've done the Adventure of the Sussex Vampire and the Adventure of the Three Garridebs. Oh yeah, and the Hound of the Baskervilles. So if you like my version of Holmes, please do feel free to look those up. Okay, I'm going to say something about Conan Doyle briefly. So Arthur Conan Doyle was born on the 22nd of May, 1859. Somebody out there may share a birthday with him. In Edinburgh, Scotland, but as you may guess from his second names, Conan and Doyle, he was of Irish descent. So he studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh and began writing short stories whilst a student. After graduating, he served as a ship's doctor on a voyage to West Africa before setting up a medical practice in Portsmouth. It was during this period that he created his most famous character, Sherlock Holmes, who first appeared in the novel A Study in Scarlet in 1887. Whilst Conan Doyle achieved tremendous success with his detective stories, he grew weary of his creation and attempted to kill Holmes off in 1893, so 16 years after he first invented him, only to resurrect him due to public demand. Beyond his Holmes stories, Conan Doyle wrote historical novels, science fiction and non-fiction work. I've done some of his horror stories on the sister podcast, the Classic Ghost Stories podcast. He was knighted in 1902, hence the Sir, for his work in support of the Boer War. In his later years, Conan Doyle became a prominent spiritualist, writing and lecturing on the subject extensively. He passed away on the 7th of July 1930 in Crowborough, East Sussex. So this particular story, The Adventure of the Three Students, was first published in the Strand magazine in June 1904. It was in fact the 36th Sherlock Holmes story written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, so I've got plenty more to read, and was later collected in the book The Return of Sherlock Holmes, published in 1905. This collection marked Holmes's literary resurrection after his supposed death in The Final Problem in 1893. This story is set in 1895, during the Great Hiatus, when Holmes was believed dead by the public, which adds an intriguing layer to its chronology within the Holmes canon, as I'm sure you'll agree. As with many of the Holmes stories, it was illustrated by Sidney Paget, I think that's how you pronounce it, for its original magazine publication. The tale's academic setting and focus on a relatively minor crime compared to murder or espionage demonstrate Conan Doyle's versatility in crafting engaging mysteries across various social contexts. So in some senses, this is a puzzle story. The crime is relatively minor. We don't approve of it, of course, but it is a minor crime. One of the things I will say is that as detective fiction has gone on, it seems that there's been a kind of an arms race for the horribleness of the crimes, so we've gone to, well, you know what, you can hardly open a police procedural these days without some vileness in it. So it's nice to have this where nobody got killed. Nobody got, anything bad happened to them, really. Let's think about how he constructs the story. So he has a very interesting way of doing it. So it's a first-person narration. I saw, I went, I did. And most stories that do that, the reason they do that is it puts you immediately there. So say, as I know more about, you're writing a horror story. If you do it from the first person, your reader is there with you, looking through your eyes, and it makes it kind of scarier. But even if it's not just about scary, I suppose a love story or a war story or anything would benefit from being right there, because the protagonist is usually your avatar. That's the usual first person, and you think of the stories you've read like that. What Conan Doyle has done with the Holmes stories is it's first person, but from a third person perspective. So it's through the eyes of Watson. So almost it's third person. Yeah. So it's Watson telling you the story. And in a sense, this is kind of like frame stories. Now, frame stories were very popular in the Victorian period, particularly with ghost stories I keep talking about. that, somebody would relate a story that had happened to somebody else. So basically you start in the gentleman's club and so-and-so tells us, I'll tell you a story that happened not so very long ago in the county of Essex. And they go on like this. It didn't happen to them, all right? And then it finishes, and that was a rum tale. And so everybody around drinks their brandy, smokes a cigar. There's a roaring fire. The servant comes in and asks, is that all, gentlemen? And they retire to bed in their London club. Sounds great, doesn't it? But and the story itself occupies the middle. Well, in a sense, the Watson stories are a little bit like that, because in some of the stories, Watson isn't present, particularly Hound of the Baskervilles. Watson isn't present for all of it, and so he is as much in the dark as we are. So Watson is our avatar, and this is necessary, I think, or it is very cleverly done, because if it was first person and we were in Holmes's head, we would have access to all his thoughts, and nothing would be particularly mysterious. As he worked something out, we would know. Now, the balance between what the reader, us, listener, knows and what is going on, a balance of information, what you know, can be either where the protagonist, this is Holmes in this case, knows more than you, the reader. That is mystery. You can have cases where you know more than the protagonist, and that's dramatic irony. Like, you might know that round the corner is a man with a gun or something, but he doesn't know that, and you watch him walking into it like you're watching a train wreck, and that is dramatic irony. And the third is suspense, where you all know the same. So I think he has the best of both worlds, in that he has first person, so we're right there, it's happening right now, but we don't have access to Holmes, his deductions and his discoveries, and until the end. And so there is mystery. And a typical detective story, of course, keeps the mystery until the final denouement. I've just done The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, and that is very much like that. It's a very clever story as well, we won't talk about why that is here, but you go and listen to it. So there is usually a denouement on the clever detective, and nearly all of them from the golden age of detective writing will do this. At the end, we are told things, and the good writer, as Conan Doyle is, has dropped little clues, little breadcrumbs that and the big question is, could we, because the classic thing with detective stories was the convention in the 20s and 30s was that so after Holmes really, was that the reader, if they were smart enough, could deduce the same as the detective, that the clues were available. I actually don't think Conan Doyle does this. He keeps mystery by withholding certain information, even if it's, and the clever detective writer, of course, puts the information in plain sight and misdirects you by a red herring, drawing your attention, much like a stage magician or a close magic, when they're doing this thing right by you. They're misdirecting your attention to something that they want you to look at, and the thing that they don't want you to look at is in plain sight, but you don't see it. There's that famous psychological experiment much, much later, I think it's in the 90s, I can't remember it, where there's these people, and this man in a gorilla suit walks in this film, and you don't notice it because you're paying attention to something else. A man in the gorilla suit comes, makes a gesture, and walks off again. And people do not see the man in the gorilla suit until it's pointed out to them later. There was a man in the gorilla suit, and then they watch it again, and goodness me, there is, and they see it, but they did not see it the first time, which shows that the human attention can be by a clever practitioner, writer, magician, filmmaker, can be misdirected. And I think there's a bit of that. So I think the mystery is achieved by Conan Doyle having Holmes withhold information from us, or having the information there but misdirecting us. All right. So in terms of pace, we have leisurely exposition and rapid fire investigation. So we have the questioning, and then we have a leisurely bit, setting the scene, introducing the problem as Holmes investigates. The pace quickens with rapid dialogue and shorter descriptive passages. So we may begin with a longer descriptive passage, and that is about putting the reader there. You use description to put your reader in the scene. And of course, a very good way of doing this is to give detail. So you may describe a front room, a parlour, and that's great. And you may then give detail. There's a blackbird singing. There's a smell of toast. And their hair is not just black, but it's got Brill cream on it. It's brillianted. Well, that's not a proper word, but you know what I mean. Modern writers do this by using brand names. So they will talk about a car, and they will name a particular car, or they'll talk about a watch. There's another thing going on with modern thrillers and modern detective stories in this. It's the lust for possessions. So I'm jumping ahead, but modern thriller writers particularly, and some detective stories are almost thriller stories these days. I had the great pleasure of interviewing publicly Peter James, the King of Crime, and talking about his new book, One of Us is Dead, which I got early access to, which was great. And it's a thriller. It's a police procedural, but it's also a thriller. And one of the things he does really well is he creates characters who live a fantastic lifestyle. I tell you what, who did this as well is John le Carré in The Night Manager. And we have a peek into the lives of the unbelievably wealthy. And that creates this frisson. We have this, we're almost living in their luxury life. And one of the ways to do this is to name particular brand products. And that is just another species of giving precise detail. So the bird that sings is a thrush, for example, or the fire that's burning is cherry wood, But if you actually drop a piece of very specific detail in, it kind of creates the scene more convincingly, draws your reader in. So that is the purpose of description. Now, it slows the pace down. So as you're going along, you don't actually want lots of description unless you deliberately want to slow the pace down, because with stories, very much of the play. I went to see a Marvel movie, let's say. It was a Marvel movie, and it was just kind of endless explosion chase, CGI, and you're like, you get bored by it. You need a change in pace. It's like music. If music was all the same tempo and nothing else happened but da 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 da, we're bored by it, even if it's exciting at first, We need variety, and he does this. However, the description gets shorter as the story goes on, and his description is used to put us in the place or misdirect us. So the Indian students, hook nose, I think. Yeah, we associate hook. Well, there's all sorts of stuff there, but it is not a good thing to have. I have a hook nose, so I can say that. But you can't see it from the front. But if I turn sideways, goodness me, and it keeps on growing. My ears and my nose just keep getting bigger. They didn't used to be this big, but something's happened. Anyway, so and that is a lot of these things are. I was reading another interesting article about, there's a website I came across called something like anxietyworld.com. It's written by a guy called Brian Dean, and he must be some kind of journalist because he talks about frames and how the stories we're presented with in the news are framed. They use particular language, particular words, particular phrases, because all of these words are associated. So if we say, and convicted criminal Tony Walker, we've already said something about it. It may be factually true, but why did we mention it? Because we want to create a particular frame. So, and this is what he does. Fiction writers do it as well. Certain, a woman in a white gown is different from a woman in killer red heels. Why should that mean it? Well, we know because we have every description, every object it trails a whole series of associations. Anyway. So, and in terms of character development, of course, if you go to creative writing, classes, they'll tell you that you have to have a character arc. Your character has to change. And that's what people want. They want to see your character go through challenges and become a better person. I'm not so sure. I think that that is just a sign of the times. I think that the people who came up with that idea had lived through the self-help craze of we must all aspire to become better people, fitter. We must, we don't eat carbs anymore. We go to the gym. We read improving books, and this kind of cult of self-improvement. How, and this idea that if you're faced by great challenges in life, their only purpose is to make you stronger and you must overcome them. I mean, listen, I've worked with people who've had desperately awful things happen to them time after time after time. And honestly, I used to have patients when I was a psych nurse, and I'd be like, listening to their stories of the terrible things that happened to them, and I'd be like, how come you have such bad luck time and time and that's a whole other essay as well. But so I think this character arc stuff is a product of the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. And I want to say, and I know you're listening, a very American thing that we've taken on board in the UK now about productivity and self-improvement. We used just to be happy about being miserable, we knew everything was shit. Excuse me, I shouldn't have said that. We knew everything was less than ideal. And we relished the fact. And we didn't have to be happy all the time and so enthusiastic and then all this stuff came across the Atlantic and we felt we had to smile and have our teeth done and have lovely white teeth. And we had to go to Turkey for it. That's another story as well. But anyway, Holmes and Watson don't change. They have no character arc. They're perfect as they are. People like Holmes for what he is. They like Watson for what he is. They don't want him to change. What if Holmes suddenly saw the error of his ways and stopped being a supercilious snob? I'm not sure he's a social snob. He's probably an intellectual snob. You know what I mean? He doesn't change. We don't want him to change. Forget character arcs. Do you think John Wick changes? He doesn't. Does the Terminator dude, Arnie, he doesn't change. We like characters to be who they are. And we don't want them going through. This is why a lot of modern stuff that gets pumped out. I mean, I've been watching Rings of Power on Amazon Series 2, and it's better than Series 1. The writing's better. I actually quite like some of Series 2. We don't want Galadriel, notice how apparent that, to have a character arc. She's a girl boss now, and she becomes a kind of a goddess later. But, I don't know. Right. Let's get back to the three students. So, in The Adventure of the Three Students, there is meticulous use of clues and red herrings. The clay found at the scene, the pencil shavings, and the cut on the desk all serve as tangible clues that Holmes interprets to solve the case. They're his library book, aren't they? They're his book that he reads. Meanwhile, the initial suspicion cast on the Indian student, Daulat Ras, acts as a red herring, perhaps a lazy one, diverting both the characters and the reader's attention from the true culprit. We might say that he's playing to their inherent racism and white superiority or whatever. And it's an easy mark, isn't it? The brown guy's the bad guy, but he isn't, as it turns out. So it could be that Conan Doyle's going, I know you're going to think this because you're lazy people. The foreign guy is the bad guy, but he isn't. So but it's an easy one, isn't it? We can, these days, actually in America, I keep saying about Americans, in American movies, films, the bad guy has a British accent or a South African accent or potentially a Russian accent. And that's just lazy as well, isn't it? Anyway, we talked about the pacing. Holmes relies on several key clues to solve the crime in The Adventure of the Three Students. The arrangement of the papers, one slip on the floor, one on the side table near the window, and one where it had been left. So Conan Doyle makes a point of specifying where the papers are. And Holmes goes, aha, very interesting. That is your first clue. don't pay attention to this. If Holmes is paying attention to it, you should pay attention to it. One might argue that we don't have enough to interpret it the same. So for Holmes, it was the culprit had been copying the papers near the window. Well, I didn't get that until it was explained in the denouement at the end. Pencil shavings and the broken pencil lead suggested the culprit had sharpened the pencil while copying the papers. Hence him checking out the knives, a blunt knife. And the cut in the leather surface of the desk indicated that someone had been writing with urgency or pressure. 2 small balls of black dough or clay, weird to call it dough, one found in the study in the other bedroom suggested the culprit had hidden there. So it's in the study, he comes in the study, he copies, and then there's one in the bedroom. Aha, he's been in here too. Holmes deduces that someone tall could have seen the papers through the window. He's 6 foot, he's struggling, so it's someone taller than that. These point. He also notes the specific type of pencil used, which is unusual. It has soft lead and a dark blue colour with silver lettering. That's an obvious clue. I think that's something like that would be used in a modern crime. Gilchrist's athletic background, particularly his long-distance jumping, another clue, explains the presence of the clay from the jumping pit, so he goes to it. Anyway, while these clues are presented to the reader, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for a casual reader to solve the crime in parallel with Holmes for several reasons. Conan Doyle does not immediately reveal the significance of certain clues. For instance, the connection between the clay and the jumping pit is not made explicit until Holmes explains it. That's to say, you couldn't have got that. You may have guessed, but you couldn't have got it. Holmes' specialised knowledge, he does this a lot, doesn't he, Holmes? Such as his familiarity with different types of pencils and clay is not common knowledge. But Holmes, if you remember, he's like one of these pub quiz guys. Years ago, I used to go to pub quizzes, and the team would split up, and somebody would like, I'm learning kings and queens, I'm learning American presidents, I'm learning state capitals, because we used to get lots like that. I'm learning baseball teams, I'm learning, we never had czars of Russia. But people would learn, and Holmes does this. He goes through, he learns about writing and printing, and famously typefaces and pencils, clearly. So the stuff you're just not going to get. The clay in the jumping pit isn't told to you, so you're not going to link that to somebody who is a jumper. And Holmes has that. That's mystery. Conan Doyle does not reveal that to you. And then you probably wouldn't have known about the pencil. However, certain things he does mention. So Gilchrist's height and athletic background are mentioned, but they're not highlighted as significant. So, and that is a great trick. If you're ever going to write a story that you want to foreshadow, you mention something, but you don't you put no emphasis on it. So, for example, the papers, the arrangement, Conan Doyle draws our attention. Holmes says, aha. He wants you to look at that. The things like Gilchrist's height is mentioned, so at the end you go, aha, you get that aha moment, but it's not emphasized. It's just mentioned. When it's not emphasized, the tendency, like the Gorilla Man, is just for your mind to skip over it. But at the end, you remember it. So if you're going to foreshadow, you drop something in and don't emphasize it. And if possible, you say, he was very tall. And he had a blue blazer that was torn at the sleeve. So you think, that's important. You forget the tallness, the height, because he's red herringed you. That's not a verb. He has created a red herring by misdirecting your attention to something else, and thus your attention moves from the actual point, which is his height. And he didn't have a blue blazer, but I'm just saying that for example. I can't remember how he misdirected it, but it's not emphasized. So if you want to do that, if you want to write a story like that, put the stuff in. If you don't put it in and you don't mention the height, at the end, your reader feels a bit swindled, and they're like, "Well, I didn't know he's tall." But if you drop it in and don't emphasize it, the reader goes, "Of course," yeah. And that is a difference between the satisfaction of the reader, "Of course," and "You what?" Which is the other thing if you don't foreshadow. Anyway. Some of the Holmes's deductions come from observations he makes, but doesn't immediately share with Watson and, by extension, the reader. Now, we know how detective stories work, and if you've read a bunch of Sherlock Holmes stories, You're going to know things about the genre. You do now. So if you watch a murder story on the TV, you're going to go, ah, yeah. And you know how these work. So it's going to help you guess. And that is your meta knowledge, if you like. You know about the genre. If you were really there, you wouldn't. If you were a character in it, you wouldn't. But because you're a listener, a viewer, you know, setting, you have meta knowledge, right? So you know, there's 3 students. It's quite explicit. It's one of those. They're all in for the exam. It's going to be one of those. And we know it's always the least suspicious. So we have the shifty foreigner. Then we have the bad-tempered failure, lazy, idle failure. He's not a failure, but he's bright, but he's lazy. He's very bad-tempered. He swears at them. And then we have the foreigner. And then we have this blonde, always good to be blonde, and tall and handsome and athletic and all the things I'm not. And so he's technically the least likely, but because we know the genre with our meta-knowledge of detective stories, he becomes the most likely. So we may guess him, but it's not a fair guess because we've guessed using knowledge as a reader, not as a detective. So what we've got is, so Watson's limited knowledge and occasional bewilderment mirror the reader's own state, creating a sense of shared discovery. Except we have an advantage over Watson in that we've read lots of these stories before. He's written them, you think he'd know, but he doesn't. So maybe the first readers would have been there with Watson, but we're not because we have this meta-knowledge, okay? So the story culminates in a dramatic revelation of the solution, a hallmark of the detective genre, particularly this early stuff. Holmes's detailed explanation at the end serves as a denouement, systematically tying together all the narrative threads that have been woven throughout the story. Classic stuff. Poirot does it. They all do it. This explanation not only provides closure to the mystery, but allows the reader to retrospectively appreciate the significance of various clues and events that may have seemed inconsequential earlier in the narrative. Exactly what I'm saying. They're there, they're foreshadowed, they're not emphasized. Now is the time you go, of course, or I guessed that. There will be, in this, there will be comments, I knew. Actually, probably people will just spill the beans, you know, in their first line, and then somebody else will be very cross in the comments, but that's the way it goes. Okay, and we have the interesting thing about this story, the adventure of the 3 students, we have Gilchrist. He's sympathetically portrayed. And while Gilchrist's actions in stealing and attempting to copy the examination papers, if you can say it, are clearly wrong, Conan Doyle presents him as a fundamentally good person who succumbed to a moment of weakness. In this nuanced way, Conan Doyle invites readers to consider the nature of moral decisions and the factors that might lead someone to compromise their integrity. The story suggests that even those with generally strong moral character can falter under pressure or temptation. I know I have. Gilchrist's portrayal, I haven't really. I've just said, no, have I? Oh, yeah. Okay. So he's a young man from a good family, albeit one that has fallen on hard times. That is to say, his father lost all his money on the horses. This sets him apart from these more typical villains, because mostly, in many cases, let's say, Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes villains are from lower class backgrounds or portrayed as inherently immoral individuals, particularly that second one. I'm thinking of the stories I know. The bad guys are rotten to the core. They're bad eggs and always were. And there's no sense of redemption, no character arc, and no sympathy from the reader. I think about, Hound of the Baskervilles, think about the 3 Gary Debs, the ones I've talked about. Sussex Vampire. They're just bad eggs, So this is Gilchrist's aristocratic background, despite his current financial struggles, likely elicits a more sympathetic response from the readers of Conan Doyle's era, who may have held class-based prejudices. I think they had a whole bunch of prejudices, but then don't we all? This social status combined with his academic promises and athletic achievements. So he's a good character and he's athletic. He's a proper man. He's a handsome young man. So remember, goodness and beauty were often seen as the same thing. If you're beautiful, you were good. I don't think that's true in real life. The emphasis on Gilchrist's remorse and his willingness to face the consequences of his actions, that's really important. And it's really important that he fessed up, or he wrote his confession before he'd been rumbled. If he'd done it afterwards, we would have said, oh, you louse, we would have said. But because he did it before, we go, oh, he's a true grit, or at least not a bad egg, and things like that. Decent bloody fella, decent chap. While many of Holmes's adversaries are unrepentant or attempt to evade justice, very important, Gilchrist's moral struggle and ultimate decision to accept punishment. So he's going to go off and work in the Rhodesian police and serve his queen and the empire. So there we go. He has a path to redemption. There we are. It's you can get a lot out of the story, can't you? A nice little story, a puzzle story, nicely done. The final thing I'm going to say is I have a soft spot for American hard-boiled fiction. And so James N. Cain, Remy Chandler, and Dashiell Hammett. The weird thing when I notice on this channel is that those stories don't get the views. So this explains if you're thinking, look, you've just done Agatha Christie, you've done Conan Doyle, come on, let's have a hard-boiled American story. That's the reason for it. I will do some more, and I probably will get Brendan Sullivan to do it. But I noticed, and remember, being honest with full disclosure, this is now my living. So I have to kind of serve up things that people like. And I sometimes do stories that I like, and in the happy places where they coincide with what the majority of listeners want. But if I keep doing unpopular stories, then I've got to think about how am I going to pay for the gas and electric. So that's the reason why. I personally really love hard-boiled, but if you're wondering why I haven't done any recently, that's the reason. I think I will get back to them because I like them so much. So I've just contradicted myself, but I do that all the time. That's my cue to go. Please subscribe, share, say nice things. Thanks again.